Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello,
Hi,
everybody.
everyone. My name is Noelia. I will be your Etchr host today, and I have with me Andrew Peña.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I'm getting a double. Give me a sec. Noelia. I will be your Etchr
I
host
thought people were
today.
talking. I was like, wow, we could hear them today?
There we go. My bad. Like I said, if you could hear us, please type llama in the chat so that I can ensure that you can hear us and see us today. Sorry for that double. I forgot to close one window. But before we get started, I want to remind you to subscribe to our channel and share this link. Invite your artist friends before we get started because we have an amazing demo prepared for you today. It's an intro to the world of gouache with Andrew, who's amazing with gouache, as we all know. Yay, we have some llamas in the chat. So before we get fully started, I'll tell you a little bit more about this series. This is a series to introduce gouache. It is dedicated to total beginners who would like to get started in gouache. It's a 5-part workshop series to introduce you to the world of gouache, designed and taught by professional artist Andrew Peña. You can purchase the bundle of workshops all together at a discount, or you can buy each workshop as you want for a different price. This series will take you from total beginner to feeling very comfortable with the medium to be able to create your own original pieces. We are working on another series and other mediums as well with other teachers, so stay tuned and subscribe to our newsletter at etchrstudio.com to stay in the loop. And I will let Andrew tell us today a little bit more of what we'll be doing today.
Yeah, so 5-part workshop, right? So I went ahead and went in and separated a lot more on being very specific on lessons that I can teach you guys on how to get started from the very beginning, literally on how to hold a brush, what brush that you can use to get started, how to use different brush techniques. So there's a whole lesson on just brush techniques. There's and how to even hold it, how to mix. There's a lesson on how to mix gouache. So we're using a very limited palette, and we're just learning how to mix. What's the right consistency? What's the different consistencies? Because a lot of times I've noticed doing these workshops that's where we get stuck. A lot of times where we're painting, and I've gone over it briefly, but gouache is its own beast compared to if you use watercolor or if you're mixing acrylic. It's kind of got its own consistency that it likes to be at, but it's also can be a bunch of different types of consistencies depending on what kind of brush making you're trying to do and what part of your painting that you're on. So I have a lesson specifically on mixing gouache. Then I have a lesson I have actually examples right here. So this is kind of brush techniques and different brush mark making that we can do. And I go over it with you guys as we're doing that lesson. And we basically just fill a sheet with different brush techniques. Then we have the color demo, where I go over different mixing of colors and the palette that we have and different ways that we can mix. And all of this funny color swatches make more sense as we talk about it while I'm doing them with you. And then we go away from those two very basic starting points to use 3 colors to do a little painting. We keep them small. We learn just how to think about shapes, and we only use 3 colors for that workshop. And then we push it forward, and I add in another color, and we talk about texture. So I talk about using texture to describe more forms in your paintings. And then we take all of that and I teach you the order of process. So taking all of the lessons that we have learned before to the 5th lesson, where I teach you a nice order of process, which we'll kind of go over quickly today to kind of show you how they all go together. So I'm kind of giving you the end result without talking too much about all those specifics, because that's what the lessons are for. So if you find yourself really kind of having trouble with what do I do with this brush? How do I really make it do what I want it to do? Then the first one is for you. Or if you got color situations, or you just want to know how to make gouache work, or everything about gouache. So it's very specific. Or if you want to know all of them, you get the bundle, like she said. So there's just so many options with this, and I'm so happy that we broke it down. And I really curated it all to hopefully help you guys be able to pick, help you be able to see where you want to do it with, and hopefully you come along with the whole journey because it all ties up very neatly, like a little presents for everybody. So
Yeah, I am very excited for it, and I hope you are too. I will be dropping the link for the bundle in the chat, as well as the link for you to purchase the mini workshops individually if that is what you would like to do. And the mini workshops start May 30th. Someone caught it that we have a typo. It says March, but I'll make sure we get that fixed.
it says
So they
March.
start May 30th. Yes. The reference image for today's demo is in the description of this video, but I will drop it in the chat just in case. And if you have any questions, don't forget to type question in all caps and then type your question as normal. That way I'll be able to find it easily in the chat, and we'll answer as many questions as we can today. And Andrew, are you ready?
We are ready. I'm putting down some colors now. And this is, like I said, it's kind of like your sneak peek, right, of what we're going to be doing. So when we are putting down our colors, we are only using a form of the Zorn palette. The Zorn palette usually is yellow ochre, a form of pure red, burnt sienna, and usually, or actually black instead of burnt sienna, and ultramarine. So I've switched in burnt sienna for my own reasons. I will go over if you take my class. So that's what we're going to be doing today, as well as white, permanent white, of course. So I'm putting down my palette right now, and I'm going to use this limited palette to paint the picture that we have for you guys all on this demo, which is a beautiful picture that I took up in NorCal. I like to paint from the pictures that I take. This one is a little blurry. It's on purpose. I do not want everything in there designed for me. So I'm going to just paint from this and capture what I can with these 4 colors and white.
Awesome. That's really cool that you mentioned that the picture is blurry on purpose.
Yeah, it's pictures, cameras normally tend to take very crisp pictures, like a point and shoot. And I've learned that if I just take the focus down a little bit by using an actual camera, then it blurs a bit of that sharpness, and my eye stops trying to capture that sharpness. So I try to use tricks to limit myself. Anyone that's been around for a lot of my workshops, you notice I'm always saying I'm limiting myself. I'm challenging by limiting because it helps me paint. And I do the same with my own photo reference. I tend to do that a lot. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of that burnt sienna, and I'm going to get it very down to what you would think of watercolor. Mixing watercolor, and then just go ahead and fill that all down. I like to get down a underpainting at first, so that way I already have one color down on my paper and it is already toned. Notice that it doesn't matter if there's brush strokes, doesn't matter if it's fully thin. All I care about is a thin layer of gouache, which is one way that you can use gouache, very thin layers. You can work up the washes in one form, but in this form, we're gonna work the order of process from thin to thick. So this is me just getting down some burnt sienna, which I accidentally got some red in there, but that's all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the burnt sienna down. And then before it even dries, I'm gonna shape out the sky. And that's another thing we talk about in class. is talking about breaking it into shapes. So the sky in this picture is one huge shape. The water in this
Mhm.
picture is another huge shape, and the rocks are their own shape.
And gouache is water soluble, right? So you do use water as your medium to
Yes, yes. So I use,
dilute it?
I want to pull this up a little bit. I
Sure.
use water as water. It's water soluble, so you use water to mix. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't use a lot majority of the time, except for at this stage because everything is wet on wet right now. I'm just
Hmm.
breaking out the shapes. Another thing I like to do is I don't tend to bring a pencil in to draw anything. I use
Hmm.
the gouache itself to kind of get down, lay in some basic shapes of what I'm going to do. And so what I like to do at this point, because I want to use that underpainting to pop out later in certain spots.
Hmm.
And I think that using this color already for the rocks, I can see it's already a mid-tone because I can go darker, lighter from this. I'm going to use it for the rocks. So why not kind of shape out a little bit of where the rocks are? I'm not drawing the rocks. I'm almost outlining just a silhouette. Give me an idea of where the mass of these rocks will be. There we go. And that'll give me a nice idea of where I go with the water. So the water will fill in all of this area, but we will get to that. Water is fun to paint. I think I picked it for an example with the colors that we have because
Hmm.
water freaks people out. You want to capture the motion of the water, but majority of the time, if you think of the water as just a solid object, I like to think of them like crystals or jewels, and you paint them
Hmm.
that way, then light captures in there. And if you just imagine it as it's solid, it kind of takes away
Hmm.
that fear of painting water. But it helps a lot to uh, in this process of being able to show different forms of textures and different ways that I pull the brush uh, to it really works perfectly in all the demos, honestly. So we just paint from the water paint beach pictures that I took, basically the entire workshop because it really helps you utilize a lot of the techniques that we talk about.
Yeah. I never thought about water that way. I like it. It's less
Yeah.
intimidating.
Yeah, a little less intimidating. And a lot of you guys, again, I've done these workshops a few times. I usually paint buildings, so I figured if you came back again, something different for you all. So a little difference than the architecture that I usually paint, which has its own tricks. Just painting landscapes in themselves also have their own tricks too.
Right.
All right, so we're gonna get started. I'm gonna go ahead and paint kind of the shape in the back, kind of the beach area and the trees. I'm gonna paint out of, I'm gonna move this over. I'm gonna paint out of one color into another color. Bring in some white because when you're thinking of background, things in the background have atmospheric perspective. So it's got more blue. It's more of a cool color. That's
Hmm.
gonna be in the back. And I'm gonna go ahead and just place and pull down the shapes of that building in the, or not building, see? Think of the things I did last time. Of the background, the landscape in the back. And I'm going to bring in a little more blue. So it darkens a little more ultramarine. And finally break into that burnt yellow ochre, to bring out a little bit more green. It's not gonna look green because yellow ochre is not, it's not like a real vibrant yellow. So it's going to be a really dulled out green because
Hmm.
you're still mixing green and yellow, but it's a more violet kind of blue and then a more toned down yellow. So the nice thing about this palette is it's going to gear more towards your tones. So you kind of think more about your values and not so much about color. You're going to think the color is going to kind of fall into place because you've limited yourself to only 4 colors. So there's only so far you can go. Even if this
Hmm.
color, this painting kind of gets all over the place with your values, it will harmonize with these colors because you only have 4. And that's why I keep it limited, especially teaching you just the basics of using gouache, because you should keep it limited until you can trust yourself to bring in more colors. and you'll see some streaks. That's something we talk about during my workshop about not mixing fully. That'll be in the mixing the color workshop. See, everything's so separated in this one.
So talking about the workshops, someone just asked in the chat if the workshops are recorded or live so that you can go at your own pace. The workshops are live on Zoom, so not on YouTube, but afterwards you do receive a recording where you can pause it and go at your own pace as well. The benefit of having them live is that you get to ask questions then and there, whereas if you watch only the recording, if you have any questions, Andrew isn't right there to be able to answer them.
And that's the other thing. That's a perfect thing to bring up is the workshops live are nice because they can answer all your questions, and especially the first two, which are specifically about your colors and your brush, just gouache itself and your brush mark making. Those are very curated to who is there as well. Now, not saying that it's for one or two people, but you can ask questions and I can veer a little right or a little left on what I'm talking about. I've got the lesson, but we can veer a little bit if there's more need to talk about certain ways to mix, or you really need to zoom in so you can see me really mix those. And the people that would get it after, which are recorded, you're going to get that. So I'm going to try to be as in depth as possible, but it's always nice to be there to kind of ask the questions that are really causing you problems. Because if you need something that's a little more curated towards you, you can just keep asking that question until the curator finally, until she finally brings it up. So I'm going to go ahead and finally break into this vast ocean here. And I'm going to start off simply with some white and ultramarine. I'm just going to start laying that in there. Now notice it's thicker because I want to lay in, I want the blue already, that bright kind of really saturated blue to come out. And I can always go over it later, but for now, I just wanted to really call for the attention, because when I look at that picture, when I was there in general, looking at that water, it really called to me. And I'm going to go ahead and start bringing in again a little bit of that yellow ochre, because this water is not purely blue. You can see some areas of kind of a dark green. That green starts coming through, like the reflection of the algae and the sky all together. And as it gets higher and thinner, you see more light passing through it. When it's dark and blue like that, you're not seeing the light pass through, because that's just the depths of the ocean, which I'm terrified of. I won't get in the water, even though I'm in SoCal where there's supposed to be beach people. I won't get in the water. But that's not about painting, is it? So let's go ahead, and I'm going to bring in a little more white and blue. And now I'm going to play around with thin layers. And if I'm going quick, I'm sorry, not sorry at the same time, because I want to get all of this in, and you can ask all your questions. But also, keep in mind that this is a fifth class, if you want to think of it that way. This is after you've already been really broken this down, so you can learn more about those keywords I'm saying. Like, we're going to play with thin now. We're going to play with thick layers now, and that'll help a lot.
So as you keep painting, do you mind if I ask you a few questions about gouache?
Please do.
Because we had some comments on our social media with some questions, and there are some in the chat that I think are interesting. You use permanent white. Do you know what the differences are between permanent white, titanium white, and zinc white?
Yeah, so because I don't use the other ones, I forget the exact name of what is different, like specifically. But I know between your different whites, they have different amounts of pigment in them. I like a white that really makes a difference with just using a little bit. I like that it is very strong white versus like Chinese white is very opaque. You can see right through it. It's used to kind of tint, kind of make very little changes, and
Mm-hmm.
each white's gonna act differently. So I like to use white. Um, I like to not use too much of it and let just enough really cause a lot of difference to the colors. So that's why I use permanent white. Titanium white is very close as well to that. What was the other white?
Zinc. I believe that one is not as opaque, not as bright.
Yeah, and zinc, yeah, exactly. So zinc is the other one where it's not as bright and it's not as opaque, so it's not going to affect it as much. So in a form of painting where you're painting more glazes, you're painting kind of, um, you're painting like layers on layers, and you're kind of bringing it just kind of slowly up. That comes in handy when you're painting the way I paint. Not as much because I'm not painting thin on thin on thin on thin on thin. I go right into the subject and I start painting thick pretty quickly. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I suggest for my workshops and to use permanent white.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
I know you've picked a color palette for this series. How do you go about picking a color palette? Um, asks someone on Instagram.
Ooh, an Insta one. All right. So when I pick a palette myself, it has to do with the location and the subject that I'm painting.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I like to just challenge myself and pick a palette that I don't really see those colors around, and I just want to see how do I paint with the more pastel-y palette, right? Sometimes I'll do that to
Mm-hmm.
myself. For this one in particular, I looked at something called the Zorn Palette because that's what I learned with, and what a lot of traditional artists and a lot of professors, a lot of people teach with the Zorn Palette because it is very limited. And with those four colors, you can really kind of mix anything that you're looking at and get it basically describe the form with those four colors. And it really forces you to understand that with just using your primary colors, you can mix
Mm-hmm.
the majority of the colors that your eye sees when you're looking out in the distance and you're out there playing or painting. So Zorn Palette is really helpful for that. So that's why I chose this. Now in the Zorn Palette, they have you use black. The reason I don't have you use black and I have you use burnt sienna instead is I want you to be able to mix your darkest color. I don't want you to already have your darkest color. When I had my
Mm-hmm.
darkest color, um, I would have a really dark painting really quickly. I want you to work to your darks. I want you to work for it. Sometimes I'll teach with this particular palette, and people complain that they can't mix a dark color, and that's a challenge. That's the point. Is I don't want it to be easy for you because dark colors mean muddier paintings, and I don't want you to get muddy quickly. I want you to work. You got to work for it to get muddy colors.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have black already in there, you know.
Yeah, I've got another question for you, both from our chat now and on Instagram. What paper do you find best for gouache?
This is another thing that we go over in our workshop that I broke apart a little more, but in that one I'll show you the differences. But here right now I am using Arches watercolor hot pressed paper. I also am very known to use matte paper. When I use matte paper, no, matte board, like what you would use to frame. I
Mm-hmm.
use that because it is very cheap to use. It's much more in my price range when I was learning, and it's really good for learning because it's gonna be flat like hot press, but it kind of has an
Mm-hmm.
almost material kind of feel like if you're like canvas, like really hot pressed canvas. So it's just really nice. It's kind of different because it's soft, but it can take
Mm-hmm.
gouache like as if it was like illustration board or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. So those are my go-tos. I have used illustration board, which was my go-to for a long time, but they can become pricey, and I like to paint a lot. I have used watercolor paper, but I have learned that I like painting on non-textured surfaces because I like
Hmm.
to create my texture with the brush. So those are my answers. But right now we're painting on arches.
Okay, cool. Perry in the chat said that's a great idea. They have they have tons of scraps of matboard.
Oh, there you go. See, so because matboard, when you're cutting and you're framing and stuff, and then you have I actually keep a lot of my leftovers after I'm done framing. For like I've had a gallery show coming up, and so all of my leftover scrap matboards are now new boards for me to paint and test on. So I love you like finding uses for scraps that we would usually just toss or throw away, but instead now it's got a purpose again.
Yeah, reusing what you have. It's also a little more environmentally friendly, I guess.
Yeah, oh, that's nice. I've been trying to do that in my life, so it's nice that I'm doing that with art because it is really hard to do that with your art, right? Like, we got
Yeah.
paints and acrylics and oils, and it's not exactly the best environmentally friendly stuff. So, whatever we can do as artists to be a little more environmentally friendly, I'm down.
Yeah, agree. I met an artist once who refused to buy more materials and just started working with what they could find because every art supply comes wrapped up in plastic.
Yeah, everything. I have a friend that actually is the same concept. She really, really learned. She's a graphic designer. She really learned how to work with things that weren't wrapped in plastic, which really limited what she was able to buy. But she's really kind of found all her way around. Like it's pretty impressive.
Cool. Yeah.
This has turned into an environmentally friendly workshop.
Well, I mean, all Etchr products are vegan friendly,
Oh, that's
so
awesome! I didn't even know that. That's you gotta.
yeah.
It's good that we mentioned that.
Now you know.
The more you know.
It's really fun for me to watch you use that flat brush and the different directions and strokes you do with it. Is that something that you'll also be covering in the in any of the workshops?
No, that's my secret. No, of course I'll tell you guys. What this right here, you'll see some areas where I'm pulling left, right, or you have a little section right here that I show you kind of painting on top of different things or the different textures that you paint with. I actually have a little
Mhm.
section right here of different pushing and pulling, and I kind of show you what you can do with this one brush. And I um I have a few books that I look at myself because we're always students, no matter how much you paint, we're always students. And
Yes.
um, that's the one thing that you should do. If you get a brush, you need to know what it can do completely. You cannot get a brush and just use it the same way you use all your other brushes because every brush is meant to do different things. The flat brush is so versatile, which is the reason why I use this for everything. I can pull away sometimes, and I'm not saying there's no reason for other brushes, but there's a reason why this is the brush that I have you guys start off with. There's so much that you can do with it. And so I will definitely be showing you the different ways that I hold the brush, that I use the brush. And if you are there in the live demo and you think of a way that I used it that I didn't go over, you can bring that up and I will definitely talk about it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So one thing I like to do with shadows, I'm gonna break away back into me talking about what I'm doing, is I
Yes.
like to use the ultramarine in the already this mixture that I have, this kind of mess. And I kind of take everything that I've done, kind of pull from all of those mixtures, bring in some of that ultramarine, and I kind of create the shadow color that will go into harmony with everything that I've been painting already. And I use that, and again, thinking in shapes, I am shaping out shadows. I'm leaving the underpainting with that texture to be the rock that is lit by the light. And I am now putting in some of those shadow shapes. So that way, when I come back later, I already have almost mapped out. It's almost like shadow mapping. That's a technique
Mm-hmm.
for figure drawing, but shadow mapping, where I'm really letting those shadows describe the form already, and so I already have a solid base to paint on top of.
Hmm.
And with this workshop in particular too, when we're done, it's not a workshop of precise, clean edge type painting. It is still about the color and shapes and the feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't lose that in breaking
Mm-hmm.
it down to 5 simple workshops. You're still gonna get the energy at the end, and it's just tools to let you decide how much energy you want in your paintings. My paintings are always very, very energetic. That's just fun to me. But some people are reserved, just like our personalities. We have different personalities, and you can't be forced to be more of a people person if you don't want to. So
Yeah.
you go to a party, you have all the different personalities, and it's the same thing with the painting. I can give you the same tools, and you can copy me at the end, but I don't want you to copy me. I want you to have tools to be able to choose how far you want to paint your paintings. And I think that's the difference between the last workshops that we've taught and this
Mm-hmm.
workshop, where I'm giving you tools to paint your own way versus the last one. They kind of all ended up being like, we all kind of had the same one. So hopefully you kind of push and pull how far you want to take these things.
Yeah. And I love that way of thinking. I think that's one of the reasons why I love seeing all of our llama family post their different versions of the paintings we do in the different workshops. It's cool to see how everybody implements their unique style and own spin to them.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you know how to use the medium, the more you can do that. And I'll use this opportunity to drop the links to the bundle of mini workshops again, just in case we had a few people join later on so that they can find it really quickly in the chat. Can I ask you another question about gouache?
Definitely.
Um, could you tell us the difference between watercolor and gouache?
Yes. So watercolor, the best way that I can describe and the differences that I really find is that watercolor works best when you're painting on a white surface and you're allowing the paper to be part of your painting. And you don't really go over and over your paint. Once you put it down, you kind of can't rework it, right? Watercolor
Mm-hmm.
to me is a lot more permanent, a lot more tricky because you're really letting water to decide a lot more of your painting. And hats off to the watercolor artists. I have so many friends that use it, and I think they do beautiful stuff. Gouache, I think, allows for way more experimental mistakes. It's thicker. It's
Mm-hmm.
can be brought back to life, kind of like working with oil paints. And you can cover right on top of what you just did with gouache, because depending on how much you paint over it, it doesn't reactivate. If you keep going over and over and over and over, it reactivates. Um, so that's kind of really the differences in how you paint with the two. I think gouache is a little more akin to has little bits of watercolor. It has more like how you would paint with oil paints, how you would paint with acrylic, except it doesn't dry right when you put it down,
Mm-hmm.
and it dries matte. So that's my favorite part about it. A lot of people try to put like a varnish on top when they're done because they want it to dry shiny
Shiny.
like all other colors. And humbug is what I say to them because it's so beautiful the way that it dries matte. Like it's so nice. That's why illustrators used it, because it was so nice to photograph after because it wasn't shiny.
Mm-hmm.
To scan to it it's really specific to gouache the way that it dries. Acrylic dries so shiny. Oil is
Mm-hmm.
so shiny. Watercolor now because you're gonna get more of the paper, but that's something that I really like about gouache.
And I guess that answers the question of why pick gouache as your medium instead of other types of paint.
because it's the best one. And also because it's easiest to clean. So if I'm going out and I'm painting consistently, like in, I take these out for plein air.
Mm-hmm.
People do plein air a lot with oil paints, a lot with watercolor. Watercolor is probably the easiest one to clean up, but this is pretty simple to clean. It's water based, so it doesn't ruin my brushes afterwards. It's pricey, but it's not oil color pricey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it just works with what I need it to do, really, and it's just so versatile. It's so versatile.
Yeah. By the way, we're 30 minutes in.
Nice. I don't have to rush.
Yeah.
So right now I'm playing with creating my own texture with dry brush technique, which is something we talk about in the workshop. And that's how you gain the light kind of reflecting on there. See if it gets a little better as I get closer.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that technique kind of picking up here,
Yeah.
picking up over here. I even do it over the rocks. It almost creates that misty feel when you're looking out into the ocean, as you kind
Yeah.
of, everything's always misty. And now we're kind of at that point in the painting where it's all a bit mid-tone, and now we can bring out some highlights or bring out some darks. And this is where the color palette and knowing how to use your color palette comes in handy. And this is something that we talk about again during the workshop. So let's push some of the lights, and I'm going to push some of the lights with that sky in the background. The blue was nice as it started, but I think we can get even lighter. So I'm just going to get some blue with the white. I'm going to go back over that.
Would you mind scooching the painting a little bit more to the right so we can? Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
There we go. Oh, and here's another thing that I use. I use a little spritzer. Spritzer sometimes is nicer to use instead of pulling water and putting the water back down on your brush, like which just seems like the natural thing to do. Instead, I'll spritz it because it just adds just enough water into the mix of color for me to get nice, thin, even coats. So I'll actually use a spritzer instead. That comes in handy when you're outside because then you could keep your paints wet, but also it really helps get that perfect consistency that I want with my gouache sometimes.
So you just spray your palette with it?
Yeah, I spray literally the color mixture that I'm working on. I'll give it a little spritz, and that's just enough water for how much I need with what I'm working with. And as I start getting closer to the horizon of what we're looking at, that little, all the trees and everything, those are trees, right? So it's not just one big dirt mound. We know those are trees that we're looking at in the background, and trees allow kind of the sky to break through when the leaves, you can see the leaves and stuff. So what I like to do with my big shapes is kind of do a couple little spots that go through them to indicate that they're not perfect, they're not buildings, they're not solid. Trees give up light sometimes that go through, and so that's my way of indicating that is just doing a couple little spots that break through the sky, and that also kind of helps create the form of that background that isn't just one solid shape. Kind of more maybe it could be an island in the back, and so you're indicating. So that's also something that we talk about is shapes and how to use them to your benefit while painting different objects. Now, anything facing upward, meaning the floor facing the sky, is going to be a bit brighter. So I want to kind of hit that floor a little bit too, a little brighter, not really strong, just a little bit more than what I had. So I'm gonna go back there and indicate the floor a little more, beach area, just a bit. So you know that now that's a flat looking up to the sky, and those are trees looking at us. So that helps with the way that I'm pulling the brush. This is flatter and it's one mix of color versus that background, which is streaks of color going up to down, almost like it's following a mountain hill or a grass hill. So different ways that we're using the brush to describe different forms pretty quickly. I'm not painting trees. I'm using one brush stroke to indicate a bunch of trees.
Mhm.
So again, now breaking back into these rocks that we left alone. And by putting this over that misty kind of area that I put when I was doing the quick strokes, I am now drawing attention to those flat shapes, and they're pulling out way more because there's texture everywhere, but I'm doing
Mhm.
less texture on the face of the rocks because those are the smoothest parts of the rocks at the moment, because that's where the light is hitting on all of them. I'm also trying to pull it almost like where the grains of the rock would be going. So I pull this down because it's got that slope. So I'm using the brush to describe that. I'm not going in and drawing. I'm using the brush, and almost if I was on that rock, bringing the brush down on the top of that plane. So I try to
Mhm.
do that to help describe. Now I've got the side, which is much more rigid. And what I like about having the yellow ochre as something to use is as you add yellow ochre into your color, it's going to bring it a little warmer. It's not going to be
Mhm.
too warm. It's going to bring it a little warmer because everything else has been so mixed with the ultramarine that yellow is starting to pull it into the warmer territory. And I haven't even touched the red yet. Everyone's like, "You made me get red, but we're not using it." We're getting there. I say it to everyone as if I can hear you guys talking. Everybody's
No, I
been
love
telling me
it
this
though.
whole time during it, like, where is the red? But I think it's just my own head.
No, I was wondering that too. I was saying, okay, he's used white, the blue, the yellow ochre, burnt sienna. Like, where's the red?
Red is last. In this situation, not always, right? In this situation with this painting,
Yeah.
red's going to be last. Why? Because if I save it for last, whatever I mix is going to pop because I'm now using red, and red has not been in any of the color mixtures so far. So this is going to allow us to get one of our darkest colors. Now, one of my favorite colors to mix, so I always try to not over mix it, is purple. Purple is so
Oh,
pretty and
yes.
pops out all the time. And ultramarine gives us a really nice dark purple when we're mixing. So we could keep it at purple, or I could make it even more toned down and bring back in that burnt sienna. And you can see
Mhm.
just in our mix, it looks like black.
Mhm.
There's your black. We don't need black. You can mix your own colors. Now I mix a dark color by not having a lot of water and allowing the gouache to really do all of the mixing. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
water it down unless I want it to use it to um, to tone slowly, which again comes in handy. But I want to use it to really pop the darks. I want to really
Mhm.
bring forth in this situation, I want to bring forth this in the front, right here. I want this to pop so much more than it is right now. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to start pulling at the edge where the light is in the dark. I'm going to pull from there. I want my brush to be a little drier.
Whoa, that makes a huge difference.
And that will make so much more of it pop, because now you've got that against lights, and darkest against lights pulls things forward right away because our eye goes straight towards contrast. So by using that trick of a technique, you're able to pull out some areas of your painting that were dark before, but now they are very dark because it's a different color. You've got red. Reds tend to live closer to our eye. The further back you go, reds tend to disappear, and you've got more blues in the background. That's why things look more blue when you're looking at atmospheric perspective. I mean, even just looking at these trees right here in the picture, or the beach, everything in that background, it's just tinted blue. That's because of all of the sea, the water, the ocean, everything in the particles of the air tend to gear more towards blue. So when you bring red, you start seeing this pop in front.
Nice. People are saying, dang, like magic.
Like magic. That's all painting is. Painting is magic. Magic is tricking people into thinking what you want them to think. And let's be honest, so is painting. So you got to use that to your advantage and just accept that we're all magicians and start working at the Magic Castle. You only get that if you live in LA. All right. Now we're gonna stop with the darks, and I'm going to pour some more white to do the last fun bits. And for this, I need a lot, because this is where I let the brush do what it's gonna do. Dry my brush, get a lot of that white. Maybe let it get a little dirty at first before I go straight white. This is where you've got to trust more than you want to trust. That's the only way to say it. It's a little scary when you start getting into this territory, because you've got to trust that your brush knows what it's doing, and that when you just kind of flick the brush and you use your hand, you've got kind of got to feel it. You've got to feel how far you can pull. And I'll show you techniques on how to kind of hone in on that as we take our class, when I talk about brush techniques. And this also talks a bit more and lends a good lesson into thick over thin, because as I said before, we started super thin, and now you can't see, I'm gonna go over here. I'm literally scooping that white and placing it down on the painting, where the light is almost just completely gone and it's just white, really pulling. And that's where the water is hitting the water and just creating those huge waves. So if I was not in my room where I could do some splats, which I'll talk about during my lesson, then I could create some splats and just let that splatter hit. But since I don't, I instead like to flick my brush.
And it gives you a similar effect.
Similar effect. A little less messy too, which is nice.
Awesome. So would you recommend gouache for beginners?
I would. I think gouache is the best thing to start off with. I think that gouache should be what you start off with. Everyone starts off with watercolor, and nothing against our watercolor artists out there, but I don't think that should be your first one. I really don't. I think it is definitely more challenging than you think. I think it's the cheapest, so that's why we all go down that route. But I think that gouache is definitely a really good beginner's tool, because it's forgiving. It is so forgiving if you understand how it works. It's not forgiving if you go thick on thick from the beginning. That is your fault. But if you understand the concept of thin to thick, and you understand why gouache works the way it does, it is very forgiving. So these rocks, if I wasn't happy with it, I could have gone over with a very thick version of this color, and I could have reshaped it if I wanted to. That's more akin to acrylic, which is a very good learning tool as well, because it forces you to mix consistently because it dries like this, or oil, where oil is more like sculpting than it is painting. So you're very forgiving. Watercolor is not forgiving. So that's why I am more akin to this being kind of the lesson tool is gouache. All right, so nearing the end here. Let's see, anything that I can do for you guys here? I found a spot that I missed. So something that people don't think about, and something again that I talked about, which is using water and thinking of water as a jewel, right? Thinking of water as a jewel, so it's solid shape. Excuse me. That also means that you're going to get shadows in the water the same way that you get shadows on a solid shape. So right now, I'm not doing the shadows yet. I'm breaking the big shapes with the shape underneath. I'm going ahead and allowing some of that to break through the same way I did up here. Big shapes are nice. Big shapes with little shapes in them are nicer. So I want to go ahead and pull a couple of the water through as if you can see the ripple. So I'm doing that real quick. But the last thing I'm going to do for you all is remember that this is a shape, which means these rocks cast shadows on the water as if that was a solid object, as if these were rocks on the floor. And when you got those shadows breaking through, suddenly it feels more solid.
Yeah.
And voila, we are done.
Wow. It is literally like magic. That was amazing. And you know, it's not super detailed, but it's detailed.
Yeah.
You can tell what is there.
There's so much in painting that is tricks of the eye, because the way I see it is, and you know, the name of the game here is I'm teaching you gouache, intro to gouache. But as I'm teaching you the intro to gouache, I'm teaching you to use your gouache to paint what you see. Because really it's about capturing what you see versus trying to teach you how to paint. That's the difference. Now, for the lesson, I am definitely teaching you how to use the gouache, but you will also get a how to paint lesson as we're doing it all, because it's all about seeing differently. It's the best part of being an artist. And the detaping. Let's be honest, we all just came to the YouTube to see me detape.
Yes. Yeah. That is the sole reason why I am here, Andrew.
And there we go. Let me get this closer. There.
Ta-da! It's like you just pulled out the rabbit out of the hat.
You're right. That's the goal. So that you see me doing it, but you don't see what I'm doing unless I'm explaining it to you. So I love that about paintings, is there's a certain point of painting, and I'm sure if you watch this YouTube video, you can find the point when suddenly your painting from a blobby mess becomes a picture. And it's such a satisfying point when you start seeing that on your own as you're painting. And so you're not just filled with anxiety the entire time you're painting.
Yeah. So I've got a couple more questions for you.
Yes.
Are you good to answer them?
Yeah, of course. Bring them.
Awesome. If someone is not completely new to gouache, do you recommend some workshops in particular?
I think, well, if we're talking specifically about the workshops that I have and how they're split up, I had someone reach out that has taken a lot of my workshops already, and they wanted to take the ones that I'm doing now because sometimes it's good to just go back and review the basics, especially when they're stripped down as much as I've stripped them down.
Mhm.
So if you want that, that's beneficial. If you have weak spots that you just want some answers to, looking at them separately does help because I have them split up into 5, correct?
Mhm.
Um, and if that's far past, go searching, and there's plenty of workshops out there that are amazing people. Everyone is offering so much really good stuff, so we can find something
Yeah,
soon.
awesome. But I do agree with you, like the refreshing of going back to the basics and learning them again, sometimes from a different perspective, helps you better understand them and develop your skills even more. Do you have a preferred brand of gouache?
I do. I prefer Holbein. That is my go-to. I like Holbein for the consistency and the color saturation of the colors. They're what I want when I get them. They I've used all the different kinds. I like it's a good bang for your buck. It's a good amount of money for what you're getting. So I really like Holbein. Today I had to use some Winsor Newton because I could not find yellow ochre anywhere for the last 3 weeks in Holbein, and I refused to order it. So I kept going to all the places. So I had to give in and get a Winsor Newton. So it's not bad. It's not like I'm talking bad about the other ones, but my favorite is Holbein.
There we go. Yeah. Um, is there anything people should know to be prepared for your series?
To be prepared, you've got the list of the material that you will need, and come in with questions. Come in with what you want to know after reading the description. So don't come into my brush class and ask me about color because that is the next class. So that is what I suggest is read the description and see what you're going in for. So if it's brush techniques, like how are you getting this technique? Why do you pull it this way? Why do you pull it that way? How can I paint smaller shapes? How can I paint the texture of a rock, people? So that's all kind of like brush techniques. It's like different things that I can do, different shapes. If you're going into color, then remember we are using those 4 colors. So think of questions on that. So that's what I would say. Come in after having read the description and with the materials. And aside from that, just come in ready to learn.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much, Andrew. This was so much fun. And people who watched our demo today really loved it too. There are so many comments saying that it was amazing, that they loved it. We have already someone who bought the bundle. So I'm really
Oh,
excited.
welcome. I'll see you later.
Exactly, right? I will drop the links for the bundle and the individual mini workshops again, but I'll spotlight your painting one more time because it looks amazing.
Thank you.
So don't forget to sign up for the mini workshops if you want to learn how to become a magician. As you become a painter, you will learn to be a magician, and why not start it off with Andrew's intro series to gouache? Right, Andrew?
Yes, right.
I'm also dropping the link to our feedback survey because we love hearing your thoughts about our workshops, our demos, and we want to continue to bring you content that you enjoy. If you have followed along or when you follow along during the different workshops, tag us with the hashtag Etchr Studio and go follow us on Instagram at Etchr_studio to find out more and stay in the loop.
Yes, go do it.
Awesome. And you can also check out Andrew's Instagram at Andrew, help me out.
Oh, you're supposed to know this. All right.
It's
Dad
Dash Drew.
Drew
See, I know
underscore
it.
with the underscore. So DASDREW with the underscore because the other Dash Drew got there first. So I got underscore. So you find me
Is the underscore in between or at the end?
at the end.
Okay. That's
But
the
I have
one
more
thing I
followers, so
didn't
you'll
know.
probably find me first.
You're right. Well, it's in the chat as well. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for supporting us as well. And we will see you in the next one.
See you later, everybody.
Bye, everyone.